from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
What should the Broncos spend in free agency on their hedge or backup quarterback, assuming all things remain the same? Drew Lock is going to be on this roster. They're not going to go get Deshaun Watson, some kind of deal like that. They're going to be planning as though that they need to add to the quarterback room. They need to have some competition in there. How much should they spend? What does that look like?
Well, $6.6 million is a nice, round, exact number that, anyway, I'm going to... Somebody's going to do the math and figure that out.
Can't I just say who that is?
I'm not.
No.
Let's leave the listeners some time to do some Rubik's cubing and figure it out.
$6.6 million. I know who that is now. More specifically,
you know who that is because
though,
you and I talk off the air.
But I guessed it without you having to tell me. More specifically, that is. I guess I'd ask Broncos fans, like, how much do you want to see the Broncos?
That's a good poll question. We should probably run tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is the acceptable limit to spend on a backup or veteran competition for Drew Lock?
Because if you spent like $15 million on a backup veteran hedge quarterback, which by the way might be the going rate for an Andy Dalton, maybe 15 to 20, might even be like 18-ish. Remember, Case Keenum was in that range when the Broncos brought him in. So if you're spending that kind of money, well, geez, you're going to have that guy sit on the bench if he loses out in camp.
And it'll cost you more than that to get Alex Smith or Ryan Fitzpatrick, by the way.
Well, if you're talking about that range, then you're also talking about potentially trading. That you're trading draft capital potentially to get some of these players.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to have you reframe that question, because when you say cost, do you mean fiscal cost or do you mean capital cost? Because capital cost includes the draft, and you got to move a draft pick to get one of these guys. It's
a little bit. It can be an either or both conversation, because if you're trading for, say, a Sam Darnold, right? If you make that deal, well, that's I can't figure out what his final year of his contract is. I mean, I guess he has the 5th-year option too, but I mean, you'd have to figure into whatever that cost is in draft capital, and then what it does for your salary cap, which would be pretty low because he's still on his rookie deal. But more than anything, like you'd have to kind of figure that all out.
Well, let's look at the free agents first, then we'll go to the draft potentials. The free agents are mostly Jameis Winston. I don't think he gets out of New Orleans. Andy Dalton, I think there are other places that he could go, including Washington.
Well, very quickly, Sam Darnold's cap hit this year is $9.7 million.
Well, there you go.
Just
how much of that is the Jets, though, because it's an option up front? So how much are you actually spending on that?
Well, the dead cap is 9.7 as well. So I'd have to kind of do some math here. But
yeah, you know what we should do is we should get Jason from Over the Cap tomorrow, and we can go through some of these and figure out what the actual cost is.
His base salary is only $920,000, but the signing and roster bonuses.
That's what I'm saying. Like, the roster bonus would be absorbed by the other team, so the salary cap, it really.
What about the signing bonus?
It depends on the structure. Like, let's get Jason on here tomorroh. I'll call him up. We'll get Jason.
So if the roster bonus isn't there, then we're talking more like about $6 million.
For
Sam Darnold.
Okay.
So we're talking about $6 million if it's just the signing bonus and his base salary. But you're right, that probably wouldn't all be on the team acquiring him.
It has to. Remember when we traded for Bouye and Casey, and it wasn't the whole number. We ended up So like we need to do. Let's get a cap expert on here. We can get Corey Joel or Jason from Over the Cap, one of those guys. We'll get them on here, and we'll do some caponomics tomorrow. But let's go through the free. We went through Winston, Tyrod Taylor. I don't think he comes here. Who else did we got on the free agent quarterback list? Dalton, Fitzpatrick. I think he's going back to Miami. What else?
You mentioned Alex Smith.
Smith, we think he's going to Jacksonville.
Well, then there's we're talking about just free agents or guys you can trade for.
Well, I'm going to the trade for us next, because the trade for us, you got Marcus Mariota. That's probably going to be prohibitively expensive if you're Denver.
Gardner Minshew.
And you're probably not trading inside the division. Gardner Minshew, Sam Darnold, you just mentioned, Nick Foles, who I've talked about extensively. I think those names are more likely. Not Mariota, but I think the other three names are much more likely.
Brissett's also going to be.
Brissett's a free agent. I don't think he's. I really don't think he's here.
You think the best option for the Broncos is more of a trade route for a backup quarterback or a hedge competition quarterback?
I do. I really do. I think the Broncos should trade back in this draft, acquire more capital in the future, and use the additional picks, because you're going to get plenty of them, use the additional picks to help shore that up this year in terms of swapping for a backup quarterback. And there are quarterbacks out there that have familiarity. Vic Fangio has familiarity with some of these quarterbacks before. Yes, he was around Alex Smith, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Pat Shurmur was the OC for Nick Foles, and together they threw for 27 touchdowns, 2 picks in 10 games. So, just throwing that out there.
I mean, you've been saying Nick Foles for months because of the relationship with Pat Shurmur. Like I said, this business is about relationships, so that doesn't really surprise me whatsoever. But, it's interesting if you're talking about trading quarterbacks rather than having to be in on wave one, competing for Ryan Fitzpatrick, competing for Andy Dalton, then there isn't necessarily a timeline. The only timeline is to make sure teams will include you in any kind of conversations about trades. That's really more than anything. So that doesn't have to be in free agency. That really can be any time.
The catch-22 here is, do you want to overspend for Dalton and Fitzpatrick? You're going to have to pay $20 million plus for those guys, or Alex Smith. You're going to have to pay $20 million plus for those guys, or trade a draft pick, probably an early day 3 type draft pick, sometime in some cases day 2, and maybe a player for some of these other quarterbacks that are going to cost you a third or less than that. Like Gardner Minshew's contract is ludicrously small. Nick Foles costs you about a third of that all total. So it's close to $7 million. Who else do we have? Sam Darnold's is close to $7 million. I mean, so there are cost-controlled options at that point that you can trade if you're willing to part with the draft capital. And day 3 picks, guys, those are dart throws. I'm willing to move day 3 picks. I'm always, unless I have a 4th-round pick that's in the first 10 picks of the 4th round, everything after that's a dart throw. And I'm willing to move those at any point for a sure thing, because that's what you're doing. So
Peter King, by the way, said with Sam Darnold, he thinks it's going to be a high 2nd-round pick.
Yeah, it's probably a second and a player. From what I understand, you're looking at, I'd heard that there were some, and by the way, there are offers out there for Sam Darnold already. They've been talking. Now, the Jets may not move him, but they are seeing what the market is. They may run it back with him. That is still very much on the table. But if they were to move him, I can tell you San Francisco, very interested. Denver, interested.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, former Raiders CEO Amy Trask on the program. How can a long-suffering franchise find their quarterback? She'll tell us next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Let's head out to the hotline, and we are thrilled to bring on Amy Trask from CBS Sports on Twitter at Amy Trask, the former CEO of the Raiders. We're obviously thrilled to have you on here. A lot of things I want to kind of get to here because we can start with the quarterbacks here because honestly, for the Broncos, this has been a little bit of an interesting stretch here. They've been trying to kind of piecework this together. And I don't know, there's always a lot of different ways you can technically attack that position and go after it. I mean, even Dak Prescott is a 3rd rounder, so it doesn't have to be a 1st rounder. But, I mean, given how things have changed over time in the NFL, I mean, if you had what you consider the best way to approach the quarterback position, what would you generally say is?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on it, the proverbial head, or the proverbial nail on its head, whichever one. And again, here I go being a dork again, worrying about the analogy. You can do it in any number of ways, and there is no way in particular that's guaranteed to work. I mean, look, you can draft a quarterback. There are quarterbacks. Tom Brady, look where he was drafted. I think he was 199th player taken. He's done okay, man. And then, of course, when I was with the Raiders, we drafted a quarterback in the 1st round who did not pan out. So, the draft is not a science. There's no, enigma code or Rosetta Stone that guides you through the draft to make the right decision. There's free agency, there's trades, and this is going to be an interesting offseason because we've all heard about the top-tier players who've indicated either they want out, as Deshaun Watson seems to want out of Houston, or they're open to leaving, as Russell Wilson has suggested he may be with respect to Seattle. But then there's the 2nd tier of players who will move, because if a team goes after one of these high, value, well-known, top-performing quarterbacks, there are quarterbacks on those rosters who will then trickle down, if you will. So there's just a lot of different ways to go about it. Free agency, trades, the draft, and I don't think any one way is necessarily perfect or not going to sometimes end poorly.
You were CEO of the Raiders, and I'm sure you see now, being out there on Twitter, same way I do, quite a bit of a disconnect at times between fan perception of what actually goes on in a front office and, what actually does go on there. What would you say is the biggest myth out there that you see being paraded around on social media?
Oh, wow. What a fantastic question. And it's a question I have never been asked. The single biggest myth, I don't know that there's any myth I could point to. We could take 3 hours and go through all the myths. I'm not sure I can think of any that I would point to as the biggest myth. I mean, maybe I'll conflate two issues here, and I'll tell you the issue of distraction. Mm-hmm. We often hear whether it's on social media or, in any other platform, we hear teams do this and we hear fans reference, well, I don't want it to be a distraction for my team. I don't want it to be a distraction for my team. You know what? I don't buy into the whole distraction myth. I think distraction can be used as an excuse. It shouldn't be used as an excuse. A story I've shared before, I was on the team plane coming home from a game when a coach just marched over to me and, very, very animated fashion told me that we didn't have the right sort of candy bars that we normally had on the team plane, and what a distraction that was. And I looked at this man and I said, if you think not having the right kind of candy bars on the team plane is a distraction, then we've got bigger issues than missing candy bars. So, teams perpetuate this myth that things that shouldn't be distractions are distractions, and I think a lot of times fans follow that and worry more about distractions than they should.
Broncos fans have had kind of a rough stretch over the last half decade in the post-Peyton Manning era. Been mostly a losing endeavor for them. Not something I think Denver fans are really used to. If you go back and look at the history of the franchise under Pat Bowlen, they were pretty successful overall, at least in most stretches. What advice would you give to a franchise that's just looking to turn it around?
Well, are you asking as to the franchise, or are you saying what advice would I give to the fans who are wading through it? I'm not quite clear on the question.
Oh, the fans. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. You know what? 4 years ago, Tampa Bay was 5-11 and last in the division, and they just won the Super Bowl. And my reason for sharing that particular example is to underscore how quickly things change in the league. Noting everything you said and how disappointed Bronco fans are for the reasons you just stated, know that things can turn on a dime. I mean, look, Kansas City in the AFC West is just very, very, very strong. The Chargers, I almost said San Diego. At some point, I'm going to stop doing that. And I live in Los Angeles, so you'd think I'd have that right by now. The Los Angeles Chargers drafted the quarterback last year, by the way. Kids call it humble bragging. I don't think there is such a thing as humble bragging because by definition, bragging isn't humble. So I'm just going to brag that on our CBS Sports Network pre-draft show, I pointed to Justin Herbert as a very, very exciting top prospect. So they seem set at quarterback. The Raiders, if they can address defense, the offense is obviously very good. They do need to address defense. So it is an uphill climb for the Broncos, but things change very, very, very fast in this league. I would be looking for another quarterback if I were the Broncos to add to the roster, not necessarily in lieu of the current quarterback. But Bronco fans should take heart on how fast things can change in this league.
Amy, this was a real treat. We really do appreciate the time. Amy Trask from CBS Sports, and of course on International Women's Day, celebrating women in sports. Really appreciate the time tonight.
Well, I appreciate you having me on very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Coming up next on Broncos Country Tonight, Tim Patrick's comments on Drew Lock. We'll go over them and give you our perspective coming up next.
Welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Okay, so let's get to this story that came out over the weekend, and Mike Kliss interviewed Tim Patrick. And by the way, we reached out to Tim Patrick. We're hoping to have him on later on this week. So
yeah, I think we'll get that worked out.
Yeah, so we want to have him on in part to talk about this quote, because this quote is being taken in a lot of different directions. Okay, so Tim Patrick was asked about Drew Lock. I'm going to read you the quote, and then Ben, according to his sources, are going to tell us how much of this is intended to sound like Drew Lock was doing something bad, which is what a lot of media members took it as, or was meant to be more complimentary. So we're going to get to that here in just a second. So this was the quote. He says, "I love Drew. Going forward, I think he understands what he needs to do. And he understands it doesn't have anything to do with his football skills. And it's good to see. I've been in Denver for a couple of weeks, and his approach to the game has been 100% different than it was during the season. He's one of the first guys in the building, one of the last guys to leave. He's doing the small things to be a great player in this league and understanding what you're not good at and getting it up to where your talent is. I think he understands it. I think this talk about bringing in other quarterbacks has motivated him. And I think he should have a big season this year." So the thing that the people are getting stuck on.
Let's go back. I want you to go back real quick and reread the line about the coming in for first in, last out line.
Yeah, so he said that his approach to the game has been 100% different than it was during the season.
Right.
That's the one that everybody's getting stuck on.
But get the rest of that quote. There's more to it.
Okay, well, that's the one. Let me go find
he talks
the full
about it not
thing.
being, it's not necessarily about him physical tools.
Okay, well, I don't have that quote. Let me pull.
See, that's the rest of the quote. That's the problem that people are getting hung up on as a truncated quote. The entire quote is really Tim Patrick applauding his quarterback and talking about how, this year Drew realizes that it's not just about being a great athlete. It's about understanding the game at a conceptual level. And, when he's coming in, it's not coming in and going out and throwing the ball 100 times. It's getting in the film room and understanding I got to look guys off, understanding coverages, understanding disguised coverages, understanding what's going on. And so what Tim Patrick is trying to say is that Drew Lock's approach to this season is different than how it was last year, where he was still in, fun-loving Drew Lock mode. And, he just came off 5 games and said, hey, I can hang in this league on my tools alone. And that's not that Drew wasn't doing the right things before. It's that he just has a better understanding of what it takes now. He came into this thing not really understanding what it takes. He was just kind of, I hate to say it, but he was kind of handed the job after a 5-game performance. And they didn't bring in any competition that would in any way ruffle any feathers. It was his job. And so his approach to that was a little bit different. Now he's got a year under his belt in the offense. He understands what it's like to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And he understands the parameters of what that preparation takes. It's not that he wasn't first in, last out before. He was. It's just the way that he was doing things and spending so much time on the physical aspects of the game rather than the mental aspects of the game was the problem. And now he understands that. And so that you got a wide receiver applauding his changed and focused approach. And instead, you've got hot take media guy out here trying to take his comments and pit one player against another because they don't like the quarterback.
Yeah. So here's the full quote. I apologize. I had a partial quote. I thought it was the full thing. Here's the full quote, including that part. So we already read all this. He's one of the first guys in the building, one of the last guys to leave. He's doing the small things to be a great player in this league and understanding what you're not good at and getting up to where your talent is. So, and again, he was talking about how his approach to the game is 100% different than it was during the season. So that isn't necessarily, as you're putting it, an indication that Drew Lock wasn't putting in enough work during the season or wasn't trying to be great.
Right.
It's the kind of work that he's doing.
Right. He's changed his focus, and he's finding the things. And now he understands. In that 5-game sample, he really didn't have an understanding of what he wasn't good at because it worked. They were winning football games. And the one bad game, game that he had was in the snow in a blizzard. I mean, it was throwaway tape. So, although to be fair, he had some YOLO balls there that probably should have been a red flag. Now you go back and you look at this and you say, okay, what are the things that you're not good? Well, you've got a whole year of tape to see that. Not taking the safe throws and trying to flex the arm. That's a common problem with young quarterbacks. Trying to take the deep throw and win the game on every throw. And sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. There's a reason guys like Alex Smith survive in the league for darn near 2 decades. And that's what Tim's trying to point out and try to highlight is like, hey, he understands that conceptually now. Now he needs to go in, look at the tape, and then put that into practice and into games.
It certainly seemed like there was a dramatic overcorrection from what Rich Scangarello was doing to what Vic Fangio wanted Pat Shurmur to do, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Because Pat Shurmur was brought in part because they wanted to push the ball down the field. That was one of the biggest complaints against Rich Scangarello. Vic Fangio said that multiple times. It was commonly known around the building that they wanted to push the ball down the field. They wanted to be more explosive, and the Broncos weren't seeing that out of their offense with Rich Scangarello. Mm-hmm. Then they bring in Pat Shurmur, and basically the edict is on him. Hey, we want to be pushing the ball down the field. We want to be an explosive offense. So what does he do? All right, Drew Lock, Let's
Light it
work.
up.
Let's work on the deep ball.
Right.
Let's try to be an explosive offense. When meanwhile, what was working for Drew Lock, what had been working for the offense, and all the players on the offense had been working the underneath stuff, getting some of those high percentage balls in play, and then setting up some of the deep passes. It had been working, but the Broncos really wanted to take this offense to another level. But you saw as the season wore on, they started to accept a little bit more of let's try to bunt to get on base once in a while. Mm-hmm. Let's take what the defense is giving us, and we'll set up some bigger things. And his interception numbers went down. His completion percentage, his completion rate went up, mm-hmm. and the overall efficiency of the offense went up. Their scoring also improved. And so that is something that they can build on. It's different than it was with Rich Scangarello. It took a little while to get there. But more than anything, you can see how, relatively speaking, the Broncos basically had to evolve. A lot of the players had to evolve with the current offense, and I think you put it perfect there, including their OC.
Yeah. I think in year two, you're going to see a lot more success on this offense. You're going to have young players that are growing up a little bit. You're going to have an offensive coordinator that understands the strengths and weaknesses and doesn't have that vertical edict that he did before. You're going to have a quarterback that understands that, hey, look, I've got to learn when to just take what they give me instead of trying to press and cutting down on turnovers. And I think you're going to see a significant leap for this offense.
Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight. Tune in to Broncos TV every weeknight at 6:30, right here on KTVD Channel 20.